She was raising 7 siblings alone in a tent through a Montana winter. The stovepipe was the first thing I noticed. It was too short. Whoever had put it together had left maybe 6 inches of pipe above the canvas ridgeline, which meant when the wind turned. And up in that draw the wind always turned, always, without exception. The smoke would come right back down and fill the tent like a cork in a bottle. I sat my horse on the far side of the creek and looked at the camp for a while. I'd ridden up into that drainage to check on a section of fence I'd been meaning to fix since October. I wasn't looking for anybody. I wasn't expecting anybody. It was the 3rd week of December, and the temperature hadn't climbed above 12 degrees in 4 days, and the whole valley looked like something had been drained out of it. All the color bleached away, everything gone silver and gray, and the hard blue of a sky with no moisture left to give. The kind of cold that makes the snow squeak under your boots like something being wrung out, a sound that goes into your back teeth. The tent was army surplus. I could tell that from across the creek. Canvas, wood frame, probably 10 by 12 inside, set back in the trees maybe 40 feet from the water. A rope strung between 2 pines with a pair of child's trousers hanging on it, frozen stiff as board. A wood pile stacked against the east side where the trees broke the worst of the wind. It wasn't a bad wood pile, actually. Somebody had thought about the stacking. A bucket near the creek, not yet brought in for the morning. A wagon, a farm rig, the canvas on the bed side-dripped and patched with flour sacking. And that stovepipe, too short by 8 inches, doing nobody any good. I crossed at the shallow spot and rode up. The flap opened before I got within 20 feet. She came out holding a Winchester. Not aimed at me, not yet, but held in a way that made plain she'd had it in her hands before and wasn't afraid of it. She was maybe 24, 25. Dark hair pulled back hard. A canvas coat that was too big for her in the shoulders, a man's coat, probably her father's, but she'd rolled the sleeves and made it work. Her face was the kind you don't forget, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it was thinking. She was reading me the whole time I was riding in, the same way I'd read the tent. Methodical, starting with the horse, moving to my hands, settling on my face. "You're on our land," she said. I stopped my horse. "Your land butts up against mine at the creek," I said. "I'm Erlin Moss. I have the Teller Creek parcel south of here." She didn't lower the rifle. "You looking for something?" "Your stovepipe's too short," I said. "When the wind shifts off the mountain, your smoke won't clear the ridge of your tent. You'll be breathing it all night." She looked at me for a second, then she looked up at the pipe. I could see her taking that in, not with embarrassment, but with the cool calculation of someone accustomed to problems presenting themselves and needing to be triaged. Then she looked back at me. "I know," she said. "I've got 2 more sections in the wagon. I haven't had time to put them on." "Mind if I do it?" Something shifted in her face. Not softening, exactly. More like she was revising whatever she'd decided about me in the first 20 seconds. She lowered the rifle to her side. "I'd be obliged," she said. "Then, I'm Calla Vane." That's how it started. I didn't know yet about the rest of them. I found out in pieces. The first piece was a small boy, maybe 8, who appeared behind Calla while I was tying off my horse. He had a cut above his left ear, half-healed, and he stared at me with the particular wariness of a child who has learned that strange men coming around usually means things get worse. His name was Thad. He didn't say it himself. Calla said it, with a hand on his shoulder that settled him some. The second piece was a sound from inside the tent. A cough, the thin, rattling kind. I fixed the stovepipe. Had to climb up onto the frame of the tent to do it, which meant trusting the structure, and I'll say this for whoever built it. The poles were solid, the guy ropes well placed, the kind of work done by someone who'd done it before. I found out later that was Calla herself, that she'd set the whole camp in a single afternoon while her youngest sister was running a fever of 103. From the roof I could see the rest of the draw. The wagon, a second horse picketed in the trees, a bay, ribby but not done. A stack of crates under a tarp not all the way secured, a corner had blown up and the crates underneath were already damp. A saddle sitting on a sawbuck in the open, leather going dark with moisture. That saddle was going to crack if it sat there another day. I came down and put it under the tarp myself before I said anything. Calla was watching me from the tent flap. "Cy won't like that." "Who's Cy?" "My brother, that's his saddle. He's particular about his things. He'll like it better when the leather isn't cracking from the wet," I said. She looked at me a moment, Then she went back inside. I was half-mounted when she came back out with a tin cup of coffee. She held it up to me. I took it. It was hot and black and far better than I expected from a camp stove in those conditions, and I told her so. "I learned from my father," she said. "He believed the only thing worth doing right away was coffee." She said it plainly, past tense. I noted it and didn't ask about it. "How many of you are there?" I said. She looked up at me. Just a flicker of something, decision maybe, whether to tell the truth or a shorter version of it. "8," she said, "including me." I thought about the tent, 10 by 12. I thought about the cough. "The sick one," I said. "How long?" "Week and a half. Fever broke. 2 days ago she's weak, she's 9. I drank the coffee. The horse shifted under me. The wind off the mountain was picking up, carrying the smell of real weather coming, the dense, heavy iron smell of a substantial storm getting organized somewhere up in the high country. "You're from around here?" I asked. "Billings," she said. "Our father had a homestead claim up in the Highwood Breaks. He died in September. We were going to winter there and sort it out in the spring." A pause. The claim cabin had burned, found out when we got there. I looked at her. She said it steady, not with bravado, not with the performance of steadiness, but the real kind, the kind that comes from having already gotten through the worst of it privately. "So you stopped here?" "Creek was open, there was wood, the draw cuts the north wind." She said it the way someone says it who has already talked themselves through all the alternatives and settled on the best of the bad ones. "We'll be all right." I looked at the tent, I looked at the sky. "There's a storm coming," I said. "I know," she said. I handed back the cup. "I'll be back tomorrow," I said. She didn't thank me. She just looked at me with those steady eyes and nodded once, like we'd made an agreement. I suppose we had. "I want to tell you what I was, before I tell you what I did." I'd served 22 years in the cavalry. Not a clean 22, there were breaks, a year out when I was laid up with a leg wound that took longer to heal than anyone thought it should, a few months when I wasn't sure I'd go back. But I went back each time. I went back because the Army was the thing I was suited for, not the killing. I've carried what I've seen from that, and I'll carry it until I'm in the ground, but the structure of it, the logistics. The particular satisfaction of thinking through a problem all the way to its end, laying out your resources, anticipating the most likely failure points, and then moving men and animals and materiel through conditions that would kill a man who was guessing. I retired at 47. Came up to Montana because I had a little money and I'd always wanted land. Something of my own. I found the Teller Creek parcel and bought it and built a house, not a fine house but a solid one, which is what I know how to build, and I'd been running a small cattle operation with hired help in summer and alone in winter. I was 52 years old and I lived alone, and I was, if I'm honest, beginning to feel the shape of the rest of my life. It was a narrow shape, getting narrower. I am telling you this because I want you to understand something. When I rode back to that tent the next morning with a pack mule loaded with supplies, it was not sentimentality. I was not swept up in some feeling I couldn't name. I looked at the situation and I concluded that without help, those children and Calavane had better than an even chance of not making it to February, and I could not ride past that. I am made a certain way. I have known that since I was young. When I see a problem I can solve, something in me goes quiet and clear and I start solving it. It is not noble. It is just what I am. I loaded the mule with flour, dried beans, salt pork, a side of venison I'd put up in November, 2 buffalo robes, a cast iron Dutch oven to replace whatever they were cooking in when I'd glanced inside the tent the night before I'd seen a single dented pot that was not going to be enough, a roll of oilcloth, a box of medicines, quinine, carbolic, spirits of camphor, a second lantern, and 4 quarts of oil. I was back at their camp by 7 in the morning. The storm hit that afternoon. Not a blizzard, not the open country kind that whites out everything and kills you standing up, but a hard, sustained snowfall with a wind that drove it sideways and a temperature that dropped to somewhere around -15. The kind of storm that isn't dramatic. It's just relentless. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps going until you find out whether the things you built will hold. By the time I had the oilcloth staked down over the tent's windward side, and the mule settled in the trees with the bay and my gelding, my hands had lost feeling twice. Calla helped me with the staking without being asked. She held the oilcloth against the wind while I drove the pegs, and she was strong in the way of someone who's been doing hard physical work for months. She didn't make a sound when the wind took the corner of the cloth and nearly stripped it. She just caught it and held it. When we got inside, she introduced me to the rest of them. There was Thad, who I'd seen. There was Dora, 9 years old and still pale from the fever, wrapped in 2 blankets in the corner. There was Cy, 16, who looked at me with the guarded suspicion of a boy who has recently become the man of a family and is aware he's not quite up to the job but will die before he admits it. There was Nell, 13, with a serious face, and I noticed this immediately, a small tally book she kept in her coat pocket, a stub pencil tucked in the binding. Provisions, I found out later. She'd been tracking what they had and how long it would last, and she'd done the arithmetic correctly, which was more than a lot of the supply sergeants I'd known could say. There was Rook, 11, who was the talker. He told me about Billings, about the journey, about the burned cabin, in about 4 minutes flat, and Calla shut him down with a look, but not unkindly. There was me, 7, with a cloth doll that had 1 button eye and missing seams on the left arm someone had resewn with coarse thread. She kept her eyes on me the whole time and never once looked at the doll, which told me something about where her attention went when she was worried. And there was June, who wasn't quite a baby. She was 4, asleep against Dora's side, her face flushed from the warmth now that the stove was drawing properly. I looked at all of them. I did the arithmetic. 8 people, 1 tent, 1 stove, 1 rifle, 1 sound horse, 3 weeks into a Montana winter with 4 months still to go. I thought I know how to do this. And something settled in me. The same thing that always settled when I looked at a hard problem and saw its edges clearly. I said quietly to Calla, "Can we talk outside?" She followed me out. We stood in the lee of the woodpile. Snow coming hard, horizontal in the gusts. She had her coat pulled up and her jaw set, her shoulders taking the cold without flinching. "Here's what I'm thinking," I said. I laid it out. My house had 2 rooms and a loft. I could move her family there. I had a root cellar with enough provisions to last through March, longer if we were careful. I had a real stove, 2 fireplaces, a barn for the horses. The baby and Dora should not be spending another night in canvas at these temperatures, and if another storm like this one was coming, and I believed it was, the tent would not hold. She listened to all of it without interrupting. That was the first time I noticed that about her. She actually listened. She didn't prepare her response while you were talking. Then she said, "What do you want for it?" I looked at her. "Nothing," I said. "Nobody does nothing for nothing," she said. "That may be where you've spent your time," I said. "It's not where I've spent mine." She looked at me for a long moment, reading me, thorough and unsentimental. "Cy will be difficult," she said. "I know. He doesn't like charity." "It's not charity," I said. "It's the most defensible position against what's coming. Your brother is 16. He knows how to think. I can see that just looking at him. Tell him I need the help." She looked at me sharply. "Do you?" "I will," I said. "Come spring there'll be fence work and calving, and I'm a man alone on 1,200 acres. I'll need hands. He can work it off and Rook too if he's willing, but that's spring. Right now what I need is for everybody to still be alive in spring." Something moved across her face. Not softness, exactly. Relief, the functional kind. The kind that allows you to take a breath before you start moving again. "All right," she said. "We'll move in the morning." "Tonight," I said, "before it gets worse." She looked at the sky, nodded once. Moving them took 3 trips with the mule and my horse. Calla and Cy got the children and the critical supplies on the first 2 trips. I went back alone for the saddle, Cy's specifically, because I'd promised to protect it, and because keeping a promise to a 16-year-old boy who is watching to see if you mean what you say is more important than it sounds. And for the tally book that Nell had left behind in the scramble, which I could tell was important without being told. My house was no mansion. 2-room log, a loft, a root cellar, a covered porch on the south side, a barn that held 4 horses in reasonable comfort. Built for one man's use and showing it, not much furniture, a table and 2 rough chairs I'd made myself, a bunk, a shelf above the fireplace with a few things on it. But the stove was large and the chimneys drew clean and the walls were thick and the roof had been done right the first time. I am a meticulous builder. It is the one vanity I allow myself. I slept in the barn that first night. I told Calla I preferred it. She didn't argue, which told me she was past arguing about things that didn't matter. I had a bedroll and a lantern, and the temperature in the barn was 30 degrees warmer than outside once the horses were settled and the barn door was blocked against the wind. It was fine. I lay there that first night and did the arithmetic. 4 months of hard winter, possibly longer in the draws where cold air pooled and stayed. 8 people on provisions built for one. We'd need to hunt, I'd need to hunt, and Cy was old enough to help if he had the temperament for it. The cattle needed daily checking. I'd been doing it alone, but I could teach Cy the route. Nell's tally book needed to be updated with what I had in the cellar and then run forward against what 8 mouths would require. Dora needed watching. The baby needed more warmth than she'd been getting, and Calla needed. I stopped that thought before it completed itself. She needed practical support. Another capable person in the equation, that was all I was. I pulled the bedroll up and went asleep. The days found their shape quickly. That's the thing about necessity, it doesn't negotiate. You wake up and there is a list of things that have to be done before dark, and you do them, and then you sleep, and then you do it again. I am not made for unstructured time. I need a problem. Now I had 8 of them, and they were all in my house. Mornings, up before the house stirred, out to the cattle in the pre-dawn dark, the lantern making a small circle of yellow in the blackness, the cold a physical presence you negotiated with rather than fought. Back to start the kitchen fire before the children woke. Cy started coming with me at the end of the first week. He didn't ask. He was just there one morning when I came out of the house, coat on, boots laced, jaw set against the cold. I handed him the second pair of gloves I'd already thought to bring. We rode out together without a word. He worked hard and he was smart, and he had a temper that flared up about twice a week and passed like a fast squall. After the third time, I simply waited it out without responding to it. He seemed to understand that this was my approach, and he reined it back some. He was proud, and the pride was real, not posturing. A boy trying to be equal to a situation that would have strained a grown man. When I started treating him like someone whose judgment was worth consulting, which I did deliberately because it was also genuinely true, something in him settled. He stood differently. He started pointing out things I'd missed, and I acknowledged those things plainly, and by the end of the second week, he was doing the cattle check without being told. Rook worked hard when he could keep his attention on a thing, which was not always, but the talking that went with it wasn't empty. He was processing. He'd ask me something about the cattle, and by the end of the conversation, he'd have arrived at a question I hadn't thought to ask myself. I stopped being annoyed by it and started paying attention to where he landed, because he landed somewhere interesting more often than not. He was going to be something. Nell gave me the tally book on the second day, just handed it to me without preamble and said, "I think you'll need to look at this." I looked at it. Her figures were correct. The math was sound. I told her so, and she nodded, very serious, and wrote a new column heading across the top of the next page, Moss House, December. She kept it updated every evening after supper, sitting at the table with her pencil while the others talked around her, until I finally told her in February that she didn't need to anymore, that I had it now. She kept updating it anyway. I didn't push the point. Dora recovered slowly but fully. By Christmas, she was sitting up and eating and interrogating me about my horses with a specificity that suggested she'd been planning those questions the whole time she was sick. She was 9 years old, and she had strong opinions about horse breeding and could explain them at length and in detail. I listened with full attention because she was usually right. Me stopped watching me like a problem to be categorized sometime around the 4th day. She started following me instead, 6 feet back, silent, watching everything I did. I let her. By the second week, she was handing me tools before I asked for them, which is more than most of the men I've worked alongside could manage. One morning, she brought me my second cup of coffee without being asked, set it on the fence post I was working near, and left without a word. I didn't make anything of it, but I noticed. June climbed into my lap on the 7th evening while I was going over the supply count and fell asleep against my chest. I did not move for 2 hours. Calla came and got her eventually, and there was something in the way she looked at me when she did, not sentimental, just taking note of something, filing it. I want to describe Christmas because it matters. I am not a sentimental man about holidays. The Army doesn't observe Christmas in any meaningful way. There's sometimes extra whiskey, and somebody plays an instrument badly, and that's about it. I'd spent Christmas alone the last 5 years, which suited me fine because I had nothing particular to do with it. This one was different. Rook found a spruce branch and brought it inside and stuck it in a coffee can, and decorated it with bits of wire and a red ribbon me had been saving in a pocket since Billings. June put a tin button on top and declared it sufficient. Nell made a list of everything we had and what we could make from it for supper. Cy went out in the afternoon and came back with a brace of rabbits without saying where he'd been, which he didn't need to because the rabbits said everything. I killed one of the roosting chickens I'd been keeping in the barn. I had 4, which was more than I needed for eggs in winter, and Calla made something with it that I couldn't identify the method of, but that was the best meal I'd had in years. Corn bread, dried apple preserves I'd put up in October, coffee, of course. We ate by lamplight with the stove running warm and the wind working at the corners of the house the way it does in December. That particular pushing and releasing, like something testing the joints. 8 children, well, 7 children and Cy, who was more than a child but not yet quite a man. And Calla and me at the table, and 2 more on blankets on the floor because there wasn't room for everyone to sit. After supper, Rook talked for a while about a Christmas he remembered from when he was 6 and their father had been alive. Something about a horse and a tin horn, and nobody interrupted him. Even Cy listened. Dora had fallen asleep against Calla's side, and Calla had her arm around her and didn't move. June fell asleep in my lap again. I don't know when that became a thing she did. The first time I'd assumed was an accident, but it had become a thing she did. Calla looked at me across the table. We were the last 2 awake or close to it. "Thank you," she said, "just that." "For what in particular?" I said. "For this," she said, and moved her eyes slightly to indicate all of it, the room, the fire, the children sleeping. I didn't have a good answer for that, so I didn't give one. She seemed to understand that. January was harder than December. The temperature dropped in the second week and didn't come back up for 11 days. At the coldest point, my thermometer read 29 below, which is the kind of cold that ceases to be weather and starts to be a geological condition. You don't fight cold like that. You survive it with discipline and preparation, because that's all you can do, and any man who tells you different has never spent a winter in the high draws of Montana. The cattle were miserable. I could hear them from the barn on the bad nights, not lowing exactly, just a kind of communal unease, an animal response to something wrong in the air. I went out to them twice a night on the worst nights, which meant Cy started going with me at 2 in the morning without being woken, because he'd heard me getting up and decided he was coming. I didn't argue. I was glad to have him. 2 calves were lost. I found them on the morning of the 9th day, frozen together in the night, and I stood there in the dark with the lantern and felt a particular kind of failure that I know isn't rational and cannot be reasoned away. Those calves should not have died. I had not anticipated correctly the exact combination of conditions that killed them. That is the fact of it, and I own it. Cy was with me. He didn't say anything for a long while. Then, "You want to check the rest of the herd first or come back for these?" "Come back," I said. "Right," he said, and we rode on. That was when I understood he was going to be all right. Not the boy learning to be a man, the man emerging on the other side. It happens at different times for different people. For Cy, it happened on a black morning in January with the temperature at 30 below and 2 dead calves behind us. He went quiet in a certain way and rode straight and didn't make anything of it, and that was it. The cold did something to the inside of the house, too. Not to the structure, to the people. 8 children and Calla and me in a space built for 1 man, for 11 days when going outside meant actual risk, meant we were on top of each other in a way that had no precedent in my life. I'd forgotten, or I'd never known, what it was like to live among people this way. The constant noise of it, the warmth of it that isn't about temperature. Rook talking at every meal, me watching from wherever she'd planted herself, June demanding to be picked up by whoever was nearest, Nell writing in the tally book by lamplight, Dora's hoarse questions, Cy and I at the table after the others went to bed, going over what needed doing the next day. And Calla moving through all of it with that quiet density, making it function. Looking at me sometimes across the room in a way that I tried not to examine too closely. The look of someone who has decided that a thing can be relied on and is checking quietly to confirm the decision was right. I did not let myself think too much about that look. I was 52 years old. She was 25. I had nothing to offer a young woman except a solid roof and 22 years of experience making bad situations manageable. These are not romantic offerings. I told myself this regularly, and I meant it. The cold broke on a Thursday. 3 above at first light, and I stood on the porch and felt the difference in the air, the very slight softening of it, the way it stopped pressing in from every direction at once. And I was as relieved as I have ever been about a weather change, and I have spent a considerable portion of my adult life thinking about weather changes. I came inside and said, "It's breaking." The way all of them responded, even Cy, even Nell, who mostly kept her expressions to herself, the release of breath, the particular noise of relief filling a room, I felt something in my chest that took me a moment to name. Pride. Not the foolish kind, not the puffed-up kind. The plain, solid kind, the kind that says, you did what was needed and the thing held. I turned away before they could see my face. There was an evening in late January I have thought about since. I was at the table by myself after supper, working through the supply count for February, and the children had gone up to the loft and Cy had gone to bed in the room I'd given him. And Calla came back to the table with her mending and sat across from me without asking or explaining, and we were both there in the lamplight without talking, both occupied. And I was aware of it the whole time, aware of her being there, across from me, quiet and busy and completely herself. And at some point I looked up, and she was already looking at me. She looked back down at her mending without a word, and I looked back at my papers. That's all that happened, but I thought about it that night for longer than was reasonable. February came in mild and Calla, and I found a rhythm. I don't know how else to put it. There is a particular rhythm that develops between two capable people managing a difficult thing together, and it is different from the rhythm you develop with people you're directing or people who are directing you. You start to anticipate each other. You start to notice without having to be told. She would know, by some means I never fully identified, when I'd found something wrong out in the herd before I said anything about it. She could read it in the way I came through the door, something in the set of my shoulders. I knew when she was worrying about one of the children versus when she was working through a practical problem. There's a difference in how people carry themselves, and she couldn't quite hide it, though she tried. We talked more in February, after supper at the table after the children were settled, not personal things mostly, the spring plan, what Calla's options were, what the children's situation might look like come April. She had a cousin of her father's, she mentioned, a carpenter in Hardin named Vetch who might have room. She was thinking through it, had been thinking through it for a while. One evening she said, "Tell me about the army." I looked at her, what about it? What it was like, not the parts you'd have to think twice about. Just what the day was like. So I told her. The routine of it, the particular satisfaction of a thing run correctly, the way a well-supplied and well-organized post felt different from one that wasn't. I told her about the men I'd respected, without naming the other kinds. I told her about the cold of the Dakota plains, which was similar to this cold and different from it in ways that were hard to explain. I told her about building the post at Sheridan, which was the thing I was proudest of in my service years, because it had been a chaos when I arrived and a functioning operation when I left. She listened without interrupting, the way she always listened. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. "You're a builder," she said. "I suppose I am. You build things and then you stay to make sure they hold." She looked at the table. "That's a particular kind of person, it's not common." I didn't know what to say to that. I looked at the fire. "My father wasn't like that," she said, not with bitterness, just accurately. "He'd start things and then the next thing would catch his eye. He meant well, he just couldn't stay." She paused. "We moved 11 times before I was 16. "That's hard on children," I said. "It was hard on my mother," she said. "She died when June was born, I think partly from the moving." She paused. She was tired. The fire crackled. I thought about what she'd said about staying, about building a thing and remaining to make sure it held. I'd never thought of it as a trait exactly, more just as the way you do it, the only sensible way. But I could see how it would look different from the outside if you hadn't had it. "Do you miss the army?" she said. "Sometimes," I said. "I miss the purpose of it, having a clear objective and the resources to pursue it." I paused. "I don't miss being alone in it. The years after you've served long enough that everybody else is younger than you, that gets quiet in a particular way." She looked at me. "You've been quiet here too," she said, "before us." "Yes," I said. "And now?" "Less," I said. She nodded and picked up her mending, and that was the end of that conversation. But something had shifted, and we both felt it, I think. and neither of us addressed it directly because there was still work to do and a winter to finish, and addressing it directly would have required both of us to say things neither of us was ready to say just yet. The hunting. I want to tell you about the hunting because it's where Cy and I settled into something real between us. In February, the elk came down out of the high country, and I'd been watching a small herd work the south-facing slopes. Cy and I went out early on a Saturday, the snow crusted enough to walk on if you were careful, the air perfectly still and cold and sharp as a knife edge. We didn't talk on the way out. That's another thing I came to appreciate about Cy. He understood that hunting required silence, and he maintained it without being reminded, which is not something every 16-year-old can manage. We found a good position behind a deadfall with a clear sight line down the slope, and we waited. 40 minutes, an hour. The elk came out of the trees at 7:30, 5 of them, a small cow and calf group. I had the rifle, but I'd been planning to let Cy take the shot if he had it in him. I watched him from the corner of my eye. He was still. His breathing had slowed. He had the rifle up and his eye on it. He took the shot. Clean just behind the shoulder. The cow dropped without a step. He didn't whoop, didn't holler. He let out a long, slow breath through his nose and lowered the rifle, and then he looked at me. His face was controlled, but not quite. There was something in his eyes that was simply relief, that he could do it, that when it counted, he could do it. "Good shot," I said. "My father taught me," he said. "He taught you well," I said. We field-dressed her together. The work of it took 40 minutes, and it was cold, hard work, but efficient, and Cy knew what he was doing. On the way back with the mule loaded, he finally talked a little, asking questions about the cattle, about spring calving, about the fence I'd been meaning to fix since October. He was thinking ahead, planning, treating his future here the way you treat a thing you intend to invest in. That evening, Calla made something with the elk backstrap that I can still taste if I think about it. The whole house smelled different, warmer. Even the lamp seemed to burn differently. After supper, while the children were occupied, Cy came to the table where I was sitting and sat across from me. He didn't say anything for a minute. Then, "I want to learn the cattle end of it, properly, not just the checking." "All right," I said. "And the fence work and the calving." "All right. I can do more than you've been letting me," he said, not with resentment, as a fact. "I know," I said. "I've been cautious. I won't be any more." He nodded once. "That's all I needed to know," he said, and got up and went to bed. Around the middle of February, Me started talking to me. Not about anything in particular, not at first. She'd follow me to the barn in the mornings. She'd been doing that for weeks, and she'd hand me things and watch what I did, and we'd be quiet together in the way that had become normal between us. Then one morning she said, while I was checking a horse's offside foreleg for a bruise it had been favoring, "This is Rector." "I know," I said. "Do you know he doesn't like his ears touched?" "I do know that," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Dora named him because of the horse in a book she was reading when he was born. "What book?" She thought about it. "I don't remember, a book about England." She handed me the hoof pick without being asked. "Do you have books?" "A few," I said. "Not many." "Calla has books," she said. "She brought 4. She left the others because there wasn't room." A pause. "She cried about the ones she left." I looked up at her. "She doesn't know I saw," Me said. She said it without apology or sentiment, just as a fact she was entrusting me with. The way she did most things, it turned out. I went back to the hoof. "She won't have to leave books behind again," I said. Me considered this, then she said, "Okay," and handed me the brush, and we went on with the morning. After that she talked regularly. Not constantly, she wasn't Rook, but in considered bursts, the way a person talks when they've been holding things and can finally let them out a little at a time. She told me about Billings, about the house they'd lived in the longest, about the school she'd gone to for 2 years before they'd moved again. She told me about their mother, not with grief exactly, more with the particular tone of someone recounting someone they never quite got to know before the knowing was taken away. She'd been 4 when her mother died. She told me about her father. She was fairer to him than Calla had been. She said he was funny and that he'd smelled like cedar shavings from his work and that he'd been good with horses, better than Cy even. She said the last time she'd seen him, the day he left for Billings for supplies and didn't come back, it was a Wednesday. She remembered that he'd ruffled her hair and said he'd bring her something sweet. "He didn't bring it," I said. No, she said. He died before he got back. She handed me the grooming block, but he meant to. I know he meant to, I said. She looked at me steadily. She was 7 years old. How do you know? She said. Because he told you he would, I said. Men who don't mean things don't tell you in advance. She thought about this for a long time, moving the brush over the horse's flank in slow strokes while she thought. Okay, she said finally, and then, can I learn to do the hoof pick? Yes, I said. Watch first, the next time you do it. She watched with total attention. She didn't ask questions while I was showing her. She saved the questions for after, and there were 4 of them, all good ones. Thad was different from me, quieter, less willing to offer anything unprompted, but in the barn he loosened some. He was 8 and he had the instinct for horses that some people have and some people don't and can't be taught. The thing that isn't about technique but about genuine interest, about caring what the animal thinks. He had it already at 8. I told him so one morning plainly, and his face went careful in the way children's faces go when they're taking something and that matters to them. My father said I had a feel for it, he said. Your father was right, I said. He nodded once, very seriously, and went back to what he was doing, but I could see the difference in how he stood after that. A small adjustment, like something that had been slightly off-plumb settling into true. The last real storm of the season came in the 3rd week of February. I won't say I hadn't seen it coming. I'd seen it coming for 2 days, the particular way the sky hazed out in the northwest, and the animals got unsettled, the feeling in the air like something drawing in a long breath. I'd already checked the root cellar and brought in extra wood and told Cy to stock the barn for 3 days, which he did without argument. It hit on a Tuesday night. By morning there was 4 feet of new snow in the yard and a drift against the south wall of the house that had reached the porch rail, and the wind hadn't finished with us yet. We weren't going anywhere for a while. Those 3 days were the longest I spent inside in years, and they were also, I realize now, the days that sealed something between us, between Calla and me, and between me and the children, and I think between the children and the idea of this place as a home. The second day, when it was clear we were going to be inside again, Rook said, "Can you tell us something about the army?" I looked around the room. Nell had her pencil, me was watching me. Thad had his arm around Dora's shoulder. June was in my lap, which had become simply where she went. Calla was at the table with her mending, and she didn't look up, but she went still in a way that told me she was listening. So I told them about horses. Not about the fighting or the cold marches or the hunger of supply lines cut off in winter. I told them about the remount program, about how you evaluated a horse for cavalry service, about the particular qualities a horse needed for hard country. I told them about a horse I'd ridden for 6 years in the Dakotas, a gray named Gable who'd got me out of a situation I shouldn't have survived, and who'd died in his sleep of old age at the post corral, and how I'd stood out there in the dark for a while before I went back inside. Rook listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Cy glanced at him. Thad had his eyes on me the whole time, even June had stilled. When I was done, Rook said, "Did you ever get another one like him?" "No," I said. "You don't usually." "But you kept going," Rook said. "You keep going," I said. He thought about this, then he said, "Were you scared?" "When I lost Gable." "No," he said, "just in general, were you ever scared?" I thought about what to tell him. I could have given him the easy answer. "Yes," I said. "Regularly, the question isn't whether you're scared, it's whether you do the thing anyway." Rook nodded slowly. He was 11 years old and he'd been scared for 6 months, and I think that was the thing he needed to hear, not that being scared was wrong or that he was weak for it, but that it was normal and the doing anyway was the whole of it. Calla still hadn't looked up, but her hands had stopped moving on the mending. That evening after the children were asleep, she said, "You were good with him, with what he was really asking." "I know what he was asking," I said. "I know you do," she said. She looked at me from across the table. "You were scared when you first came up to the tent, I could tell." I looked at her. "Could you?" "You were perfectly controlled," she said, "but there was something careful about it, the way you checked angles before you moved." A pause. "You were scared of what you'd find." I thought about that. I knew what was going to happen before I knew it, I said. I knew I was going to involve myself, and I didn't know yet what that would cost. "What did it cost?" she said quietly. I looked at the fire. Nothing I wasn't willing to spend, I said. We sat quietly for a while. Then she said, I want you to know that I know what this winter cost you. The calves, the extra months without income, the hunting you did for food instead of for the market. She paused. I see all of that. I haven't said so, but I see it. I looked at her. I see you, she said, simply, plainly, like a fact being stated that had always been true. I didn't have a good answer for that either. But I held it, the weight of it, the particular warmth of it, and I carried it carefully, the way you carry something you don't want to break. March came in cold and went out warm, the way Montana sometimes surprises you. And by the last week the snow was melting fast enough that you could hear the creak from the house. A sound I hadn't heard since November. A sound that meant something different now than it had in November. Calla brought it up on a Tuesday evening. She said, You were going to say something to me that first night we moved in. You started to and you stopped. I looked at her across the table. The lamp between us, the house quiet, the fire settling into itself. Did I said. You were going to tell me what you'd need in return, she said. Or what you expected, you changed your mind. I told you what I expected, I said. Cy and Rook working come spring, that's all. That's not all, she said. Not accusatory, precise the way Nell was precise with numbers. I didn't say anything. I've been watching you for 3 months, she said. I know how to watch people. I've had to. She paused. You live alone. You built a house with 2 chairs at a table and you only use one of them. I made both chairs myself, I said. You were lonely, she said, and now you're not, and you don't know what to do with that. The fire popped. I put my hands flat on the table. You're 25, I said. I know how old I am. I'm not, I stopped. I'm not in the habit of taking advantage of a situation. I know that, she said. That's why I'm bringing it up, not you. She folded her hands on the table. You have been, for 3 months, the steadiest person I have ever been around. And I have been around a lot of people in difficult situations. Most of them, when things got hard, found something to blame or they ran. You just arranged things. You kept solving it. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was the same, level, direct, but something behind it had opened. I want you to know I saw that. I see it. All of it. I looked at her. I was aware of my own heartbeat, which is not something I am usually aware of. And, I said, my voice came out quieter than I intended. And I'm not a child, she said. And come spring the children are going to need to be settled somewhere, and I've been thinking about that, and I think there are options, and I think one of them involves me staying in this valley. She held my eyes. If there's something here worth staying for. I thought about what to say for a long time. What I finally said was, I built those 2 chairs because I thought someday I might have a reason to use both of them. She looked at the chairs, then at me. That's very practical of you, she said, and the corner of her mouth moved, just barely, just for a moment, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from her, not the one she put on for the children's sake, but the one that was just her own. And something broke loose in me that had been held tightly for a very long time, some formal posture I'd been maintaining since I was younger than Cy and hadn't let down in all the years since. I'm not a poetic man, I said. I don't want a poetic man, she said. I've had enough of things being prettied up. I want a real one. We sat there in the lamplight for a while. The fire, the lamp, the quiet house, the sound of the creek starting to run somewhere below. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine, just for a moment, warm and deliberate, and the weight of it was something I felt in my whole chest. And then she took it back and stood up and said good night and went up to the loft. I sat at the table for another hour before I went to bed. I didn't sleep particularly well, but not for a bad reason. Spring came the way it always does in Montana, sudden, then hesitant, then overwhelming. The snow melted in patches, and the creek ran muddy, and the cattle came through rough but mostly sound. Cy and I spent the first 2 weeks of April going through them one by one, checking feet and eyes and condition. He worked without being told. He'd refined the cattle check on his own, had a better system than mine in a couple of respects, and I told him so plainly. He nodded and said, I learned from watching you. I thought about that for a while. Calla wrote to the cousin in Hardin, a carpenter named Vetch, a widower of 58, her father's cousin who had a house and no family left and room enough. He wrote back that he would come up when the roads opened. She read me the letter at the table. Her face was careful while she read it. He sounds decent, I said. He is, she said. I met him once when I was 12. He was kind to me then. She folded the letter. He'll be good for them. All of them, I said. Dora and me and June and Rook, she said. Thad wants to stay, the horses. A pause. Nell would rather stay if there's room, and Cy will want wages. There's room, I said, and he'll have wages. She set the letter on the table. That leaves me, she said. Yes, I said. She looked at me steadily. I'm not easy, she said. I should say that plainly before anything else. I know, I said. I've noticed. I have opinions about how things should be done. You've shared them. You've mostly been right. I won't always agree with you. Good, I said. I don't need someone to agree with me. I need someone who'll tell me when I'm wrong. Something in her face settled then. Not the careful expression she'd worn since December. Something underneath it. Something that had been held in suspension, let go. You're not wrong very often, she said. I'm wrong more than you think, I said. I just don't always show it. I know, she said. I've been watching. Vetch came in the second week of April. He was a steady-looking man who shook my hand firmly and spent 20 minutes with the children one by one, unhurried, and I could tell he was good before he'd said 10 words. He had a particular way of kneeling down to talk to June, level with her eyes, patient, waiting for her to be done being shy. That told me everything I needed to know about what kind of man he was. The morning they left was harder than I expected. Not for me, for the children. June cried for a while, and me held the cloth doll very tightly and didn't look at anyone, and even Rook went quiet. Calla held each of them for a long time in the yard. She didn't cry while they could see her. She cried later in the kitchen, after the wagon had cleared the lower pasture. She had her back to me, and she didn't make any sound, but I could see it in her shoulders. I didn't say anything. I stood near enough that she knew I was there, and after a little while she turned around and her face was the face of someone who has done a difficult thing correctly and is now allowed to feel it. They'll be all right, I said. I know, she said. That's not why. I know, I said. And then she stepped toward me, and I put my arm around her, and she pressed her face against my shoulder for a moment, warm and quiet and real. And that is the warmest and most particular thing I've felt in all of this life. And the words I am using for it are not adequate words, but they are the only ones I have. We married in May. A preacher in Hardin, a Tuesday morning with Cy and Nell and Thad as witnesses, in a front room that smelled strongly of pipe tobacco and had a very nice view of the mountains through the east window. 12 minutes, maybe. Simple words said plainly and meant without decoration. On the ride home, she was quiet in the comfortable way she had. The spring grass coming in green on the hillsides, the air still cold in the shade but warm where the sun hit it. That particular May air of Montana that has no fixed temperature and carries the smell of things starting again. After a while she said, I should tell you something. All right, I said. I decided that first night, she said. Not what I'd do, I didn't know that, but I decided you were someone I could trust. Within the first 5 minutes you rode in. I looked at her on her horse beside me. That's a quick decision, I said. I'm a quick judge, she said. I have to be. I've had 8 people depending on me getting it right. She looked ahead at the road. I'm right more than I'm wrong. You are, I said. And I was right about you, she said. She said it simply, as a settled fact. We rode the rest of the way without much talking, which we do well, and have always done well. The mountains ahead of us, her horse keeping pace with mine, the road I'd ridden alone for 5 years looking different now, because everything looks different when you're not riding it alone. I want to say one more thing, and then I'm done. There is a particular feeling a man gets when he has done what he can do, done it well without flinching to the best of his ability, and beyond what most men would attempt, and someone who needed it badly knows it and chose him for it freely. Not because they had to, not because there was no one else. Because they looked at what he was, at all of it, the age of him, the wear on him, the way he moved and thought and addressed a problem, and they decided it was worth staying for. I've been respected in my life. I was a good soldier and I earned the regard of men I respected, and that counts for something real. But there is a different thing altogether, a thing I didn't know existed until Calla Vane put her hand over mine at the table in February and said she wanted something real, not something prettied up. She saw me clearly, she chose it anyway. I was 52 years old and I had 1 chair at the table, and I'd convinced myself that was enough. It took a woman raising 7 children in a canvas tent through a Montana winter to show me what enough could actually look like. This is what I know of it for what it's worth. That winter is more than 20 years ago now, and she is still the same. Steady, precise, thinking 3 steps ahead, with a quiet that is comfortable in any weather and a will that has not softened and opinions about how things should be done, that she will still deliver to you direct and without decoration. She has never prettied anything up in the 20-odd years I've known her, and she doesn't intend to start. Cy runs a small ranch 2 valleys over. He has a wife and 3 children, and he works his land the same way he learned to work mine, methodically, without drama, anticipating what fails first. He comes over in calving season every year without being asked. We don't talk much when he's here. We don't need to. Nell married a surveyor and lives in Billings and writes letters that are organized, thorough, and never shorter than 4 pages. She still keeps tally books. Her husband finds this charming. He is a lucky man. Thad is still here. He handles the horses and knows every one of them by name and personality. He learned that from me, and me learned it from Dora, and it passed down through the family in the way that good knowledge passes. The younger ones visit when they can. June came with her own daughter last summer, a 4-year-old with dark eyes and the kind of seriousness that makes you think she's already got a tally book somewhere. She climbed into my lap and went to sleep. Some things run in a family. I still have the 2 chairs. We've worn through the first set and built a second pair, bigger table now. But 2 chairs, I kept that part. I made them both right at the beginning before I had any right to hope for it. There is something in that I have never been able to fully explain. Only that a man ought to build for what he hopes for, even when hope seems like the most impractical thing he owns. Even when the shape of what he hopes for isn't clear yet, you build for it anyway. It has been, in the end, the most useful thing I ever built.